Kristi Noem, like many of her counterparts, in the Republican Party, have taken a hallucination-based approach to the COVID-19 pandemic, and believing that if they just stick to their, conservative right-wing values and blame somebody else, such as China or whatever, that this will be this will just be like a headache and it'll go away after a while.
If I said I cared, would you say you believe me? Hatching a plan for deceiving. He lies to the kid that he sees in the mirror. Well, there's an infinite light on the broad horizon. Look to your love when you can't find hope. Once we have lost, we are free to rise again. Oh.
But tribes, ironically enough, have taken a science-based approach. They believe the science because they understand that Indian Health Services, or IHS, which are federal responsibilities by the federal government to provide Indian health services because of treaties or other kinds of agreements, are chronically underfunded.
You cut out the dosage most of the day with excuses. Well, nothing worth doing has ever been easy. Oh no, used to look the other way and say it was love, but she was just someone to waste your life with.
And in fact, on May 20th of this year, there were 5 tribal organizations that signed a letter to David Bernhardt, the Secretary of Interior. He's a former oil lobbyist, calling for the resignation of current Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, Tara Sweeney, over several things, but primarily mishandling of the $8 billion that were allocated under the CARES Act money for tribal coronavirus relief. And what their claims kind of set out is that the federal government has used this particular moment as an opportunity to facilitate land grabs. The federal government has used this particular moment as an opportunity to facilitate land grabs. As an opportunity to facilitate land grabs. A federal court denied the Mashpee Wampanoag the right to restore their own homelands. That has since been reversed. The Tohono O'odham Nation's burial and sacred sites were being destroyed by explosives to build Trump's border wall. The construction of which, as we know, has continued unabated despite the pandemic. And meanwhile, the Interior Department also allowed for-profit Alaska Native corporations, many of which have investments in oil and gas industry, to seek payouts from the COVID-19 relief money reserved for tribal governments. So it's unclear how that determination was made, but it has been since ruled by the courts that Alaska Native corporations will receive tribal money. But at the same time, the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, is pushing for the TC Energy pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline, to be constructed through tribal reservation lands. Meanwhile, the tribes themselves have set up health checkpoints, and it's important to note that they're not turning people away. They're not armed checkpoints. They're just doing health and safety checkpoints for people coming on and off the reservation.
I never lied to you, that's for certain. So do me a favor, baby, and don't you ask about what I'm doing in the bathroom for so long.
And It's an attempt to basically implement safety protocols that the state itself and Trump himself refuses to implement. And this is all leading up to the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. And while it's been reported, and rightfully so, that this pipeline is bringing in thousands of outside workers, out-of-state workers, into these, very precarious tribal communities, and there's concern about man camps and the high rates of sexual violence. But now the threat has been doubled with the threat of, spreading coronavirus to these already hard-hit tribal communities.
Interestingly,
so it's really funny because somebody like Trump said that Christopher Columbus represents the American dream, the beginning of the American dream. Christopher Columbus, landed in a Caribbean island that he thought was India, and he thought it was his dying breath, and he never stepped foot on the continent that later became the United States of America. So why he's celebrated as a figure has to do with the fact that he enslaved, raped, and tortured indigenous people, and he himself was a genocider. And that's the legacy that somebody like Trump wants to uphold when he's creating these monument statues, or he's issuing executive orders for the protection of the so-called heritage of this country. It's a heritage of conquest and theft.